Hey, dear listener, welcome to another episode of 10 Laws, the podcast with East Forest. I'm East Forest. I guess that's self-evident. But this week, I am really excited to have a conversation with Don Lattin. He wrote a book called Changing Our Minds, Psychedelic Sacraments and the New Psychotherapy. And it's a really wonderful book that gives you some history about psychedelic research, but also, what's going on now, because it's a real renaissance of just things happening with psilocybin, MDMA, and ibogaine, and even just what's going on with ayahuasca. So Dom was just a great resource to tap into getting an overview of where things have been, where they are now, and where maybe they can go, which is just really important work. He's someone that I learned about because I was listening to Dennis McKenna on Joe Rogan's podcast, and Dennis mentioned this book, and he mentioned Don Lattin's book, which he also is the author of the Harvard Psychedelic Club and a few other books. He's a journalist, and yeah, it was just really great to talk to him, and I think you're going to find a lot of really interesting stuff in this conversation. If it's something that you're really deep into this subject or you don't know anything about it, I think you'll dig it just as much as the book itself is quite entertaining to read, no matter what your level of prior knowledge is in this. But I'm coming to you today from Portland. I'm in a hotel room, still doing some music with the AWOL Dance Company. We have this next upcoming weekend is going to be some more shows, Thursday through Sunday. So this last weekend was awesome. It's just really amazing. I mean, we did this back in 2014. This is a bit of a remount. They've changed a lot of the choreography for the better, really. It's even better. But it's just reminded myself of what a special experience it is to have a whole dance company making music around, making a whole show around some music that I wrote, and to get to be able to perform it live and be outside. And like last night, when the in between songs, the musical end and the lights come down before the next song and piece starts, and there were all these crickets, like this huge chorus of crickets. And of course, there's 900 kinds of crickets, so each one is different. And for me, I was like, oh, those aren't mine. These are quite unique. It's a new sound. And it was like the forest and nature was playing along with me, it's just cool, man. It's not that often you get to play outside and be in the dark and be in the forest and have moments where it's really quiet like that, where you can hear nature and the forest singing around you. So if you are in the area, I highly recommend coming to check this out. It's really just going to be this one last weekend, and it's pretty cool. You can see more about tickets and information at eastforest.org/tour. But we're in the heat of the summer and getting my summer on, doing some more and more traveling, definitely trying to balance things out and get some time I got to find some time to get some outdoor time as far as like backpacking. That's something I've been really longing for. I feel like the last year and a half or so, I haven't had as much time to do that, mostly because of music commitments. But it's such an important thing for me and my consciousness, and just like reconnecting back to the land, and just, what it is. So just reminding myself of that as I'm sitting here in this hotel room by the interstate, that I'm really longing to get out and do that whole thing where you get to be. It's something about sleeping out there. It's like a little different than day hiking. It's important. So if you don't do that, I recommend doing it, even if it's just a quick one-nighter. But we'll get into this conversation with Don. Hope to see you out there on the road. And please do say hi, info@eastforest.org. Let me know what you think of the podcast. If you have any questions or you have any comments, you can send them my way. And we'll just drop into this. This is Don Lattin, the author of Changing Our Minds. All right. Don Lattin, thank you for joining me. Really happy to see you.
Thank you, Trevor. It's great to talk to you.
Where are you coming to us from?
Alameda, California, which is an island in the San Francisco Bay. It makes it sound very exotic when I describe it that way. It's off the coast of East Oakland, So,
wait, where is that? That's on the over by the ocean?
East Bay side. There's a little island right next to the port of Oakland, and it's a great community. It's kind of like small town America right in the middle of the Bay Area metropolis.
Huh.
It's called Alameda. Yeah.
And how long have you been there?
I've been living here since about around 2003, but I've been in the Bay Area since 1972, San Francisco Bay Area since 72. Came up to go to college originally, to go to Berkeley, and never left.
Well, that's great. I have a feeling we have a lot of mutual friends. I heard about your most recent book, Changing Our Minds. I was listening to another podcast. I think it was Joe Rogan's, and Dennis McKenna was on there. He mentioned your book.
Yeah. So, Dennis is great. Yeah, we have the same publisher. They just did a great resource at Synergetic Press.
Yeah,
ethnogenic plants and research into all that. So yeah.
Well, I like that their logo is a nautilus, which is my logo.
Yeah.
So I dig it.
We're on the same wavelength here.
Yeah. But so basically your book, and then the subtitle, Psychedelic Sacraments and the New Psychotherapy. So this is something that has interested me for quite a while, and I've been tracking this. So a lot of what you're writing here, I'm familiar with some of these studies and some of these people, and there's been a bit of a renaissance of this as of late, particularly quite recently. There's been a lot more activity in press and books and people. And so it's something I wanted to dig into.
It's been building for about 10 years, seems like, yeah.
Yeah, it has. Yeah. I mean, your book, Michael Pollan's book, are two that just came out about the same circles of this thought. So it's getting a lot of energy right now. Like, I feel like I've had a lot of people reaching out to me, asking me if I've checked some of this stuff out. And I'm like, yeah. I've been familiar with it.
Yeah, it was really interesting for me to see Michael Pollan's book, because mine came out about a year ago, and my title is Changing Our Minds. And then he titled his book, How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
And of course, Michael Pollan, he's a brand, I'm kind of known in the Bay Area, but I worked for the San Francisco Chronicle for many years. And so people know me around San Francisco, but Michael Pollan is Michael Pollan. So, I have a very tiny little publisher, maybe the tiniest publisher in the world, Synergetic Press. They 1 or 2 books a year, and he has Penguin Random House, literally the biggest publisher in the world. They're part of this global. So to see all the attention that Michael's book is getting has been amusing and humbling, but it's great because people are getting, the word is getting out about the beneficial uses of these medicines. So that's great.
Yeah, we're all fighting the good fight, but I'm sure that was sort of an amazing, I'm going to call it a synchronicity, just to have not only that book come out, but also the titles being so similar.
Yeah,
I'm assuming you didn't know about it. I don't know
if it was exactly synchronicity. Who knows? But
who
he actually said his title was even more similar than mine, and they changed it a little bit.
Oh, really?
I don't know. I mean, you can't copyright a book title. It's a funny thing. You can't actually copyright a book title. So, you can call a book anything you want. You can call a book the Bible or the Da Vinci Code or whatever you want.
Well, yours came out a year ago. So it is what it is. It definitely came out first. So, and I've been enjoying the read. I'm about a little over halfway through. And it's really, it's well written. It's easy to read. I enjoy it. It's good information in here. I mean, it's a good time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a journalist, so I'm used to kind of explaining things to a general audience in kind of a simple, straightforward way. So, yeah.
Yeah. So take me, I want to get into a lot of the meat of some of the subject matter, but could you just take me a little bit back how this all came to be? I mean, why you're writing about this? This is sort of putting your neck out there a bit, and for better or worse, it's a bit of a fringe subject, and it's something that I'm into, but I know how it goes. Like, you're probably doing this for a very personal reason, and I'm curious how that came to be.
Yeah, well, it was a mixture of personal and kind of professional interest, really. I came of age in the late 1960s and early 70s. I kind of caught the tail end of the psychedelic counterculture of the 60s. And so I had my own, awe-inspiring, mind-bending, sometimes terrifying, experiences with LSD, mushrooms, peyote, and later with MDA, and then after that MDMA. So I had my own personal experiences, and they were they really opened me to a new way of looking at the mind and consciousness and religion and spirituality. And, but I've been a journalist my whole life, ever since high school. I was editor of my high school paper, college paper at Berkeley. So I wound up writing about religion and spirituality as my beat at the San Francisco Chronicle for many years. And it was a lot of reasons why I eventually chose to cover that subject. But one of the reasons was because of these experiences that I did have, these powerful religious experiences that I had on psychedelics back in the day. And so that was part of it. But in terms of this latest book, Changing Our Minds, it's really the third in a trilogy of books that I've done that touch on the history, the current scene, and the future prospects of psychedelic research. And the first one was the Harvard Psychedelic Club, which HarperCollins published, a big publisher, in 2010. And that book did pretty well. That's the one book. I've done 6 books. That's the one that really sold. And when I was doing that, so Harvard Psychedelic Club is a group biography of Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, Houston Smith, and Andrew Weil, all of whom crossed paths at Harvard in the fall of 1960. And it's kind of a history of the psychedelic 60s through their stories. Anyway, when I was doing the reporting for that book, which was about 10 years ago, I realized that there was a lot of new research going on. This was just opening up again. So that's when I originally got the idea to do this book, which took me 10 years to get around to finally doing because other projects got in the way. So it was, both personal experience that I had, and just it's a great story. There's just very human, inspiring stories of people who are struggling with, like soldiers who are struggling with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, people struggling with addiction, depression, who have really been helped by these in a therapeutic way with psychedelic-assisted therapy. And then I also am writing about the spiritual dimension of this, and a lot of younger people now seem to be discovering the power of ayahuasca, peyote, psilocybin mushrooms. So there's both the sort of a therapeutic and a spiritual revival going on, kind of tail end of the first wave of that. I'm really interested to see what's happening now, and that's what I write about in the new book.
As you were saying psilocybin and ayahuasca, your internet connection stretched your words out. I think we had, it's like, it sounded psychedelic when you said it.
Ayahuasca.
Yeah. One thing I've been interested in tracking some of these studies is, I know that for a lot of the researchers, the spiritual element is a big driving force behind them, but they're working within this framework of the FDA and science itself, and that's a very difficult thing to quantify. So I always wonder if they're sort of leaning enough onto, say, ceremony and the spiritual element to help accentuate the experience. Because from my own experience, that's a really, really important aspect. Obviously, the set and the setting, right? So I know they're doing it in clinical settings, and they do their best to make it warm. And I think they're coming from the right place and from their own energy and what they're trying to engender. But I know that, for instance, ayahuasca, and I think one of the reasons ayahuasca is works, I should say, effectively for people is that it almost is never outside the container of that ceremony that it's in. You don't hear about it as a recreational drug. It's pretty much always done inside a shamanic context in a circle, and there's a lot of hullabaloo around how it's done. And I think that's one of the reasons it is a powerful experience for people, whereas mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, all have broken outside the confines of ceremonial space. As a matter of fact, they really didn't have much of one to begin with, and it's sort of now coming back to re-educate society to say, what happens if you were to take mushrooms in a more ritualistic manner with a lot more intention to it. Most people aren't aware of what it can do for them. They are not aware of the power that it actually holds.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. There are real limitations to looking at these medicines, these empathogens, entheogens, psychedelics, whatever you want to call them. There's a limitation to looking at them as just a therapeutic tool, and there's a medicalization of psychedelics that's going on, which some people are very, very troubled by, actually. There's a lot of controversy within the psychedelic therapy movement and the broader psychedelic movement about this, as you probably know. And there's reasons for the medicalization. I mean, it's if you want to get these drugs available to people to use that can help them for whether it's spiritual or psychological healing, they're illegal now,
right.
most of them. And so you've got to jump through certain hoops of the FDA to get these medicines decriminalized, taken off Schedule 1 and put onto Schedule 2. So they have to. So they're forced to study these drugs like other drugs, and these drugs are not like other drugs. Psychedelic drugs are completely different.
Right.
It's not the drug that really has the effect. It's the experience you have, which is occasioned by the drug. So it's your experience that can be healing.
Yes,
nurturing, not the actual drug, but because of the way we've classified these medicines or substances, they have to jump through these hoops and do these double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. And there's some value in that to see if they're actually proving that they can be very effective. So it's working in a sense, but you're right, it's limiting. But on the other hand, this doesn't stop other people from exploring these realms in other ways, who are willing to, do it quietly.
But we can see, and you're making some great points, and we can see from the cannabis movement that. So I was in Oregon until recently. I moved to southern Utah, but I grew up out there. And when cannabis became legal, it really took away a stigma for certain people. You'd think for most people they'd be over that by now, but you'd be surprised how many people considered using cannabis because it was legal now. They're okay with it suddenly. And I was like, well, fantastic. Why not? Give it a shot. And I know that for a lot of people, if we can destigmatize, let's just speak about, say, psilocybin or MDMA, and it becomes more of a medicinal tool or respected in certain ways for its actual values, a lot more people might consider going into that space. And it would touch a lot more people because in some ways you're singing either to the choir, if it's just people who are going to seek this out and do it anyway, or you're working with people who are probably younger and experimenting. A lot of us, I had the same experiences when I was in college. I didn't know what I was doing. I got lucky a few times, but I also had some hard experiences.
Right.
And I had no way of really understanding them. And no one really, I didn't have anyone to talk to about it that really knew what they were talking about. I didn't have any elders. I didn't have a structure. And so I really spent over a decade sort of chasing that and trying to.
How old are you, Trevor?
I just turned 41 a couple days ago.
Okay. Yeah. So no, this medicalization of marijuana is some of the people in the psychedelic therapy movement see that as the model. First, you decriminalize it for medical purpose, and it opens the door for full legalization for recreational spiritual use. Other people think, no, we shouldn't even talk about that because that'll scare people off. It'll freak out the government. And people think, well, no, LSD is different than marijuana. I mean, it's for LSD or even psilocybin. They're not dangerous in terms of addictive or toxicity, but psychologically, they can be damaging if you're not ready for them. I had that personal experience as a 19-year-old, which I read about in a couple of my books. But it's an interesting dynamic that's going on right now. But you're right; it would be great for people to have guides of some sort available to help them.
That's my dream. That we have
retreat centers.
We'll have all real research, but also anecdotal research about this is the way to do it, where it's fairly reliably, repeatably, positively spiritual, and this is something that's out there for people. It's like, we'll do it like this, and it's not completely absent of the spiritual or ritualistic aspect, but it's not religious. It's just very grounded.
In Changing Our Minds, I interview some of the research subjects in these clinical trials that are going on. And a lot of these people are not spiritual or religious people at all. Some of them are academics, they're scientists, because some of these studies are done in the university context. So that's the kind of population you get in terms of volunteering to be a research subject. And people are having these profound spiritual or religious experiences. It freaks them out. It surprises them because they don't even expect it. They don't think of themselves as, quote, spiritual. but so there is a very thin line between the sort of like a spiritual conversion and a positive therapeutic outcome.
They're not mutually exclusive, right?
They're not. But there's this whole. But they're taking these drugs at hospitals with doctors. And,
right.
They try to humanize it with looks like somebody's living room, but you're still in a hospital or a medical center for the most often. And so it's really interesting. It's kind of a mushing together of religion and medicine, in a fascinating way. I'm as a journalist and someone who's covered religion, as a beat for many years, I find it really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to stick the psychedelic experience into the religious model because from my point of view, the psychedelic experience is a felt experience, a direct experience. And a lot of the religious experience is sort of chasing that. And this is maybe a little incendiary to say, but it's sort of that the religious experience these days, it probably comes from the priest class saying, we'll have the direct experience and tell it to you.
Well, that's what people forget, that.
So it's like, you don't need that.
In the shamanic sense, like in indigenous culture, the shaman would take the peyote, not the person, not the client or the patient or the lay person, the civilian, and the shaman would have the experience. But the Western model is this whole drug tourism business. All these people are flocking, going down to Brazil or Peru, and having these experiences themselves, which is actually not the traditional shamanic way that these substances were often used.
Right. And just looking at it from the fact that it works at all, that these substances exist and they have low toxicity for the most part and can just link up with your brain and you have these experiences at all, is enough to just make you wonder on a philosophical level. These seem to be available to us, and there seems to be some sort of reason for that.
I think that's a lot of the healing power, especially when people take these who have never experienced it before. And a lot of these clinical trials, they're looking for, they call it psychedelically naive volunteers. And this really pulls the rug out from under your whole idea of what reality is, consciousness, time, space, being, non-being. It's like, it's such an incredible opening for people that, people stop smoking. Like there'll be a clinical trial. We're going to help people stop smoking with this. And then you ask them later, well, how did that experience on the mushrooms help you stop smoking? And they can't really articulate it. They'll say things like, well, it just seemed like, why smoke? I mean, there's no reason to smoke. I mean, I saw God, or I saw whatever you want to call it. I don't need a cigarette. I mean, it's like the smoking becomes irrelevant.
It belittles, the things you use to cover up. It
doesn't matter what you're addicted to. It can be, it can be alcohol. It can be heroin. I mean, people just are sort of their minds are just kind of blown open, and that, to me, I think of that as, I mean, not religion, the religious experience in terms of a religion, but a spiritual religious experience
in an academic sense,
a conversion experience, a transformative experience, if you like that word better than religious.
Yes, which most folks are desperately looking for, even though they don't realize that's what they're looking for. With the emergence of yoga and the organic movement, everything in our culture is just thirsty for authenticity, and really, there's a deep hunger for that which is genuine and real.
Yeah, and I write about this on Harvard Psychedelic Club. I think a lot of the interest now in yoga and mindfulness meditation, I think there's a lot of reasons why that developed over the last 50 years. But I think the psychedelic movement of the 1960s was a big part of it. I mean, you go to the San Francisco Zen Center or meditation centers, retreat centers, and you ask people, how did you get interested in meditation? And they'll often say, well, there was this acid trip, in 1967 in Golden Gate Park, or somebody went to a rave in the 80s or 90s or whatever. I mean, it's all these drugs, these sacred plants are an opening for a lot of people. And, then there's a whole debate about, should you keep taking them? I mean, once you get the message, do you hang up the phone? That was Alan Watts' line,
So given, yes, they've been pretty active in our culture actually for the last 40 years, maybe 50 years maybe. But it's been an underground things more or less. And it's going through this medical model where it's sort of coming out, trying to legitimize itself. And I'm curious, through your research, What do you think is the path for psilocybin in particular? How long do you think it would take for it to reach where? What's the real practical outcome?
Well, in terms of the clinical trials with psilocybin, they're a little bit. There's two tracks. There are clinical trials involving MDMA, which is often called ecstasy or Molly, and they're a little farther ahead on that in terms of
Rick
the
Doblin
FDA
stuff,
approval process. There's a 3-stage process. They're both going into stage 3 trials, which is an expansion of the clinical trials where they have a lot more people at a lot of different sites all across the country to see if they can replicate the early success they had in treating whatever they're trying to treat. So with the psilocybin, this research was originally sponsored by an organization called the Hefter Research Institute, which is out of Santa Fe. And they're using psilocybin-assisted therapy to treat depression. Initially, they were treating depression just among people with a life-threatening diagnosis, a cancer patient. They're not treating the cancer with psilocybin. They're treating the depression or the existential distress or the fear that the cancer diagnosis has brought on. And they've been very successful in terms of this, because that's often the psychological aspect of getting a cancer diagnosis. It's often as bad as the cancer itself. The cancer can even be cured. You can go into remission, but there's often a very, very takes a very profound psychological toll on a lot of people. Right. So there's been a great success in that. And I don't know, if things go as they're going so far, people are saying, maybe 4 or 5 years, we could see not legalization of psilocybin, but rescheduling of it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2, which would mean that doctors could prescribe it for therapists to use in, carefully controlled therapeutic settings.
Could they prescribe it off-label?
Perhaps. It's unclear how the FDA would deal with that. The model for that right now is ketamine, which is a Schedule 2 drug. And it's not exactly a psychedelic, but it does have psychedelic properties. It's a dissociative anesthetic, but it can lift you out of your ego and your normal kind of consciousness. And in the right setting, it definitely has psychedelic properties. I mean, and I talk about this. I experienced this myself in the book. And so what's happening right now is a lot of doctors are not a lot, but a certain number of doctors are prescribing ketamine off-label to treat depression in a psychedelic therapy setting.
Yeah, you have to do it several times, right?
That's actually controversial. There are some people in the medical community that don't think that's appropriate. I've actually, had my own personal experiences with this. I was on antidepressants for many years, traditional antidepressants like, Prozac, Zoloft, and I got off them. Actually, originally, when I was doing the research for Changing Our Minds, I was down in Brazil and I went to a retreat center, an ayahuasca retreat center, and some people said you shouldn't be on antidepressants if you take ayahuasca because there could be a serotonin surge. It's a slight risk, but I was wanting to get off them anyway, and I was able to, and that was about 4 years ago, and I haven't gone back onto them, but I did also try this ketamine-assisted therapy with to treat my melancholy and my depression, and it's been very helpful for me. It doesn't work for everyone, but and that's an example of a doctor. So this is legal. A doctor can write a prescription for lozenges, ketamine lozenges, which you can first you do it with the doctor, then you do it at home on your own, and with say music and a playlist and eye shades, just like the kind of format that they use in the clinical trials. And for me, that's been very, very helpful. But some people think that you shouldn't do this at home on your own. It's dangerous, So there's a debate going on about off-label. So we'll probably have the same debate with psilocybin and MDMA when that happens. And the FDA could, they haven't, the devil's in the details. They haven't gotten to the point where they're going to decide whether they're going to allow off-label or not.
Well, I'm interested to know, how much, if psilocybin is able to be used in a medical context legally, it's sort of how so? I hope it's not so restricted that you can only do it in such ways that it's not as profound or powerful as it could be.
Yeah, well, there seem to be
medicalized.
two tracks towards decriminalizing. There's the FDA saying that it's a therapeutic drug, and then it is limited to that kind of a context. And then there is the religious freedom side of it, where people are using it in. So with ayahuasca, for instance, you have churches, two networks of churches in the U.S., the branches of a Brazilian church that use ayahuasca in their religious ceremonies, and it's completely legal. So in terms of the law, those are the two ways to kind of legalize, either the religious freedom argument, where you have to show the government that you are a, quote, church of some sort, or the therapeutic model. Until and if you get to the point where you, like what's happening with like marijuana in California, this year they finally legalized it for any use. But that seems to be the pattern in terms of the legal situation.
Well, maybe the states would ultimately be deciding for themselves how you can execute it in their state if it's becomes
well, that's what's happening with marijuana,
right?
Yeah. And but you never know. These are political decisions. And I mean, some people were afraid that the Trump administration was going to crack down on all this psychedelic assisted research, and they haven't. As a matter of fact, some people think it's even becoming easier because the Trump administration wants to let big pharma get new drugs to market faster because it's all deregulate the industry.
Right. They almost don't understand what they're doing.
So in a way, the MDMA trials are kind of speeding ahead under that new those new marching orders from the FDA under Trump. So it's funny, But on the other hand, there could be some bad outcomes. There could be a scandal. There could be a controversy.
Oh, sure.
There could be a bunch of fake news about the dangers of this to scare people. All kinds of things can happen. These are political decisions to allow this, and political decisions can change. As we know, it's the history of, of drug reform in this country. It's a crazy situation. What drugs?
Yeah, I think with a lot of the cannabis stuff, money talks, and as they started to see the money being made there in tax dollars, it's hard to resist that.
That's and the other money talks part of this is one of the reasons that the psychedelic assisted therapy has been slow is because big pharma was not interested in these drugs, because this is not a drug you have to take every day,
right?
and
exactly.
buy every day. These are drugs that you can maybe take just in terms of healing PTSD or working on a substance abuse issue. You might take this once, twice, 3 times with therapy and be, quote, cured. and so there's not an economic model for big pharma to compare that to like traditional antidepressants where you've got to take these pills every day for years, So yeah, it's all mixed up with our economic and political models,
It's funny because this is more or less available to anyone. But it's just what we're really looking for is a way for it to be safer and more standardized and open to more people. And you have to go through these complex models to get there. But you're right. It's in some ways it's almost too good to be true that they don't have to have that many experiences to have actual impact in their lives positively. Seems to be so far quite a range of issues, and who knows what else it may help or may not help. But I think if anything, it's just great to have that information to find out, dig into it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, one thing I've been, I'm a musician, so I'm also really interested in the role music and sound and plays in guiding these experiences. I guess I'm a bit biased, but I think it plays a big role. And
I agree. Music is central to this. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do know that particularly with psilocybin, you put more importance, you're probably more open to a lot of different types of music in a sense. But nonetheless, I still think that a lot of these research projects have been missing the boat on fully harnessing the power of that music. I listened to some of the Johns Hopkins playlists that they've put out there, that the music that they use. Mm-hmm. I think it could be better. And I think it would be a stronger experience. I think their data would be better. This is just a shot in the dark, but that's from my own anecdotal experience and putting a lot of attention into it.
Send them some of your tracks. I'm sure they would probably be open to putting them into the mix.
Yeah, I'm sure I could. I've also been, it's on the docket eventually, but I'm going to release something that's specifically for that. That's 4 or 5, 6 hours long, and instead of skirting around it. And it's like, well, you could always piece together different songs. It's like, well, here's just something right there. You can hit play, and it's designed for that.
Yeah. Well, there's, as you probably know, there's a huge underground therapy scene here where people are using music. And it's funny because I'm kind of a music that you, singing for myself, like music that I would kind of, look down my nose at, like, oh, that's too new age, or that's too, kind of, pseudo-Native American flutes or whatever. A music that I would think, oh, come on, give me a break. When I'm on the psilocybin, it's like incredible. It's profound. It's beautiful. I mean, it's just, there's something about, we just appreciate everything in a new way,
Yeah.
We drop our judgment about all kinds of things, including about music. So some people, they like classical music when they're on a mushroom journey. Some people like, world music. What I've found is lyrics in your native language get in the way.
Yeah, it activates that language center of your brain.
I had some experiences in Brazil with ayahuasca, and there's a musician down there who I worked with at a retreat center, and all the music is in Portuguese. So I don't have any idea what they're talking about, but you kind of, you can use your imagination, and it's part of the kind of envisioning process. When you don't know the language, it takes on this sort of deeper meaning in a funny way, or music without any lyrics. Like I have a playlist I use, and there's only one or two songs on it that have English lyrics, and they have particular meaning for me. Like there's a song that really reminds me of my mother, and there's a song that reminds me of my father. And I put that in there as sort of to honor them. And there's another song that really reminds me about gratitude, which I think is sort of something that I need to try to remember in my life, to be grateful for what I do have. So there, but everyone's different. So you can say, you don't like the music at Johns Hopkins, but
well, it's not that I don't like it. I actually am criticizing its role. Look, and there are many roads to Rome, and there's lots of different tastes, and yes, lots of things can work. That's all fine. I'm trying, like in a Kairos in an ayahuasca ceremony is not just a song they came up with. It's like it's their musical tool. It's a piece of technology they're using that also has a deep spiritual element to invoke a spirit, and that's something that the scientific side I think is missing a little bit. They know it intuitively, they know it in their hearts, but they're like, we just need evocative music, and we find what works best. And I'm like, yeah, but what about the spiritual side of it? What if you're using music that was developed in that space? What if you're using music that it's inspired by that? They could quantify if it works better if they like. But I'm saying I have a feeling that's an aspect they could get another several percentage points of effectiveness if they tried some of this stuff out. And it might be a bit much for them, but I don't even know that they're really harnessing the full power of even modern sound healing science of entraining the brain, things like this. They're just putting in music that they feel is appropriate.
Yeah. Well, everyone's just figuring this out. I mean, we're in our infancy.
Like I said, Don, I'm biased.
Yeah.
I get worked up about it.
Yeah, and I on the playlist that I use, I do this weekly ketamine, music meditation it's about an hour and 15 minutes. And there's actually a song on that playlist which was recorded in the jungle in Brazil during an ayahuasca ceremony that I was at. So I hear the sound of the jungle, the frogs and the bugs and the insects before the music starts, and the percussion and the guitar. And it's beautiful because it really takes me back there. There's something about that particular song which just reminds me of that feeling, which was the first time I experienced this. So, and then and it's more of a traditional Ikaros ritual song.
Yeah, and imagine they spent potentially 1,000 or thousands of years developing these songs. What if we spent even 1,000 years in the ketamine space and people became experts generationally and developed music for that? Like, I guess I'm just arguing that there's a power that could be unlocked there through the music. Because one thing I found in every shamanic ceremony I've ever been in, whether it's Lakota or Peruvian or San Pedro or ayahuasca, it all involves sound and music and rhythm. That's the vehicle by which we work through it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, it's wonderful that we're doing these studies and they're having amazing effects, and we are using music, right? So it's like, but one of the things we're not doing that everyone's always done, it was typically live music.
Right.
It was typically the idea that something is being passed through the shaman or the guide who is transmitting this music. And it can work quite well with recorded music, but I think there's that special element of that live, in the moment, transmission. And I know that's really hard to swallow, maybe from a medical standpoint, because it's a little woo woo. But there's
I think they appreciate that. I think they know there's something about how the brain, like for instance, with Alzheimer's patients or people with dementia or memory problems, they find that music really helps people. And I find that myself. I'm getting older. I'm starting to forget. I can't remember what I did last weekend, but I can remember all the lyrics from, Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks, album. And there's something about music and memory that there's a real power there. And I think I think neuroscientists are starting to study that and starting to figure that out. And, they say the music drives the medicine. That's the how I heard it described. Music drives the medicine. I mean, and it's really true. And for me, the other thing, because like I say, I've suffered from depression, and the psychedelic therapy or the music meditations, what it also reminds me of the importance of music in my life and to find joy in music. So it's inspired me, for instance, to get back into my guitar, to get back into my own music, or to get back into Tai Chi or other kinds of meditation. So that's what I think, is the power of this. I think the real test of this drug therapy is, can you go beyond the drug context, and does it change the way you live your life?
Of course.
So what it does for me is it reminds me of things that I find joy out of, whether it's music or dance or Tai Chi or something. It just reminds me of that and of that power. And that's what's so helpful for me.
Yeah, it's not a panacea. It's more shows you things, and then you make changes in your life.
It's a reminder,
Yeah.
We know this. We know.
Yeah.
We know what brings us joy.
Yeah, but like you said, these things are powerful reminders sometimes, profoundly powerful reminders. And I think Terence McKenna had some lines about it. I mean, he was a believer that you could do 20 years in the ashram sweeping the floors, and that could be a fine path, or you can also speed things. It's more of an accelerated path. It's like getting like big doses of information and felt experience all at once. And that integration is super important. Otherwise, not much will probably change.
Yeah. Right? Well, some people can get to these stages with just meditating. I have trouble with that. Maybe it's just my mind, my egocentrism, my self-centeredness, whatever it is, my scheming kind of plotting. As a journalist, you're always having to figure out the angles. For me to break through, I need heavy artillery, like really powerful music and really powerful medicine to break out of my normal way of thinking. I don't really. I do meditate. I try, but I need some heavy artillery to break on through to the other side. I admit it. I wish I didn't. I really wish. I wish I didn't. I didn't. But I didn't. But I didn't. But I do. For decades, and one session of psychedelic assisted therapy, it's just can be such a breakthrough.
It really can. Yeah. Well, are you open to sharing? I know in the back of your book you mentioned a little about this, about your own personal experience, and I was wondering. I often find that useful.
Sure.
Especially was that with psilocybin, that one at the end?
Are you talking about the story at the very end of the book? Yeah. That was with psilocybin. That was interesting because that's kind of a long story. I'm going to try to think about how to.
Hey man, we're time rich, but I hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so, in writing this book, I had done psilocybin before, many times, back in, not in recent years, but, back in my 20s and 30s. And, but, in writing Changing Our Minds and doing the reporting for Changing Our Minds, I wanted to experience these medicines in the closest context I could get to the clinical trials that were going on.
Great. I'm glad you did. Yeah.
And I couldn't, but I didn't qualify for, I didn't qualify for a clinical trial because I didn't, for whatever reason or because of timing. So, but basically it's the same model but it was an underground therapist. So I found a woman through someone else I knew who's doing underground therapy. And I met with her, and she is taking a little bit of a chance because she's doing something that's against the law. I'm taking a little bit of a chance because it is illegal. Not that anybody's going after people for doing this. We're white, upper middle class folks in Marin County. they're not.
You're not the only.
They're not
ones.
going after.
Yeah.
They're not going after us. This was in Marin County where I did this. Anyway, so you meet. So I found, and that's the other thing. You have to find an underground therapist. So a lot of people have asked, how do you do that? It's not easy because there's it's underground, right?
Right.
But I found this woman through my contacts, and we had arranged to have a psilocybin session. And she usually does it in a little cottage she has, but I was renting a little cabin at Stinson Beach, beautiful little beach north of San Francisco in Marin County. And I was working on the book. I was going through all my interviews and trying to chart out the book. And then I had this session in the middle of that. And I'd scheduled this a couple months before, and then less than 2 weeks before the session, a really good friend of mine died. An old friend of mine named Les, who was part of this group of people that I met back in the 70s where we actually had some really powerful celebrations together on MDA. And it was a very sensual but yet spiritual kind of communion that we had. And these are people that I became lifelong friends with, because of MDA. And then we stopped doing it, but we were for decades we were very tight. Some of my closest friends, and a lot of these folks have died. Over the last few years, they're older than me. I was in my 20s back then; they were in the mid 30s. Anyway, so my friend Les had died right before this session, and so I went into the session with the therapist thinking that I want to look at these issues of loss in my life with these close friends, and plus my mother had died not that long before that too, And so she asked me to bring some photos of people, make a little altar. And so she came, and she's using actual psilocybin mushrooms. In the clinical trials, they use a synthesized psilocybin because they can control the dose that way. So she, lit some sage. She does a ceremony. We actually went I took the mushrooms. I told her I wanted to have a full-blown mystical experience. I need a lot.
Okay, watch out, Don. Yeah.
I said I want a full-blown mystical experience. She said, I'll give you what Terence McKenna would call a heroic dose.
5 grams.
Said, oh, be careful what you ask for, But
yeah, exactly.
So I ate a lot of mushrooms, and then we went out for a little walk on the beach, and we came back. And, so I put the eye shades on. She sets up her tools of her trade, which is a MacBook Air with nice speakers. And she starts playing the music and suggests that I put the eye shades on because you're trying to simulate a ceremony that would go on all night, say in an indigenous setting. So that's one reason you put the eye shades on. Also to go within. And it stops it from being kind of like a quote normal psilocybin experience where you're looking at nature and how beautiful that is. The whole idea is to go within, and kind of psychologically. So I'm doing that, and I'm not really getting. I mean, I'm having some visuals, but I'm not a visualizer. I tend to have more of a sort of a somatic kind of experience, bodily energy kind of than visuals. And then I would take the eye shades off and I'd look around, and I was kind of I thought I was having too much fun because my thing of mushrooms, it was always fun. I think in Mexico they call them the little clowns. Everything seems kind of silly and fun and profound at the same time. And I had a feeling that I was asking myself, am I avoiding this darker material, these recent deaths in my life? I mean, and so I took the eye shades off and I kind of crawled across the room and I looked at some of these photos, and then I put the eye shades back on, and she changed the music. This is how the music is important. She changed the music into more of a symphonic kind of like a orchestral, kind of a string section. And it's like my heartstrings snapped when I heard this rising crescendo of this orchestra. And it just released this floodgate of grief. And I started just crying like I've never cried before. I'm not a kind of guy who cries much. I find it difficult to get into that space. And when my friends had died, including Les, I was in charge of organizing the memorial services, and I did all the stuff. And I never really grieved. I never really felt it. And what the psilocybin did for me is I just started crying and screaming and sobbing, like some old Greek woman, and a peasant or something, and just in a way that was so out of character for me, but and difficult, still in a way difficult. But so she was there to hold my hand and say, yes, let it out. That's what these therapists do. They're kind of hands off. But I think it was a combination of her suggesting I bring the photos, having the right kind of music, being someone that I could trust and open up with, that allowed me to have what was a very cathartic, grieving, healing experience around this loss in my life. And it was much more powerful than I expected. But it wasn't, I didn't have any, visions of, crystalline cities and, machine elves that Terence McKenna talks about or whatever. It wasn't like kind of a Disneyland psychedelic trip. It was very emotional. And it was the kind of thing that I think most people, maybe normal people, could just do on their own. They could feel that grief, but for whatever reason, I was blocked from feeling it. And the mushrooms just opened that up.
Yeah.
And so that's the story that I end the book in. And it was kind of so ironic, too, because it was exactly 40 years ago in the one street over that we had these sessions with MDA with this group of people. And so it felt like kind of a coming home to those early kind of seminal experiences that I had with these medicines back in the 70s when, it was kind of more like a party in a lot of ways. It was recreational, but there was also a very deep spiritual and kind of emotional connection which was forged with these people, which lasted, for years and years and years, including years when I didn't know drugs whatsoever.
Sure.
And I think that's how I judge the power of these medicines. Is does it, how does it, like I said before, how does it affect the way you live your life and relate to other people? And that's how I found them helpful. So.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Terence McKenna, I think he had that line about people ask, how do we promote the medicines? And he said, just living your life. So as you do, and if it's inspiring to others, they're going to ask you sort of what's your secret. And if that's part of it, it's a lot better than proselytizing. It's just to have, just to be a happy, grounded person.
And these drugs can also increase kind of grandiosity and ego. They don't always, that's why the kind of intention and setting is so important.
It's everything.
And integration of the experience afterwards. So with this, just to finish the story with this therapist, so then I arranged to meet with her a couple of weeks later, and we talked about, this stuff, and and she takes notes and would tell me things that I'd said that I'd kind of forgotten, and that was it. I mean, it was. I'm not saying it changed my life, but but I found it healing in that sense, and
Well, everyone's journey is unique, and everything's just another step in that journey, really. I mean, whether you consider it a big step or a small step, they're all important steps. A lot of ways, just having the courage and the intention to even step into that space is quite profound. Just saying you want to go there.
In Brazil, I had different experience. I don't need to go into details, but I had experience around some of my issues with. I had a problem with alcoholism and cocaine addiction. And I'm 12 years sober now. And I had some insights, even though I sobered up, 8 years before that first experience in Brazil, I had some insights into my addictive mind. The ayahuasca was kind of a teacher showing me some stuff about the nature of my mind, which I found very helpful. So, and I wasn't expecting that, that wasn't my intention. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the medicine has its own idea about what you need. That's what they say. And people talk about ayahuasca being like a teacher, and I have trouble rationally kind of swallowing that. Okay, it's a plant. How can it be a teacher? How can it have consciousness? But when I did it, I see what people mean. I mean, there was a different quality to the ayahuasca than other psychedelics. There was sort of it was like a teacher, someone showing me a little sort of tour through my own brain. And,
creating these bridges to your unconscious, to your heart, to your experience, your history. Yeah.
It's so hard to articulate it, Trevor. I mean, they say it's ineffable, right? And,
I like the Lao Tzu quote.
I feel it's like I never feel like I'm really doing the experience justice when I talk about it.
Well, we're not, but there's also a real beauty and honor to even talking about it, because I think it's a story that needs to be told, and it's one that's being retold right now. Your book's a big part of that, and I mean, I honor you for doing that. It's just we're crafting a new story about something, and it's not to say it's this or that. It's just to tell those stories and let the path continue for all of us. But I certainly think it's needed. It's definitely needed these days. We need any help we can get, any tool we have, and these are pretty powerful tools. I mean, is it something that you're hopeful about?
Yeah, I am. I'm hopeful, and I'm also a little worried that it's kind of seems almost like it's going too well. Things are going I know how the media is. I mean, I worked in the news media for my whole life, and we love to build things up and knock them down. Mm-hmm. And so there's been this incredible wave of positive coverage for good reason about this work. And I just worry that, that either the government or the media or some of this infighting that's going. There's a lot of infighting in the psychedelic movement. That some of the most vicious stuff is really within the movement, and I'm a little worried that could set things back. I hope not, because I think I think these medicines really can help people, and I think I show that in Changing Our Minds. And,
lots of examples.
And I've seen it in my own life, and maybe not as dramatic as someone who's like an Iraqi war veteran with PTSD who is on the verge of suicide. As I write about in the first book, or people who were just very, very suicidally depressed because of a cancer diagnosis, who, were really, their lives were saved with these substances. So that's what I'm trying to tell the human story, both in the journalism I've done. I wrote some stories for the Chronicle and some magazine stories about this before the book. Some of those stories are also in the book. And I think that's how people can relate to this. If they just hear the stories of real people, especially people that there's a lot of sympathy for, like military veterans, or cancer patients. People have sympathy for those people.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons, that's sort of one of the kind of clever, kind of strategic reasons why the research organizations pick these populations, because they knew that,
Yeah.
And also, it's a huge problem. I mean, PTSD in the military is a huge problem.
Huge problem.
Expensive, people's lives, and hundreds of thousands of people's lives are being affected and destroyed by this. I mean, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, because the current fix is to take antidepressants and antipsychotics, and it doesn't really work that well for most people.
It doesn't work for a lot of people, and the people that are getting into these clinical trials are the treatment-resistant ones. So that's the other reason why these results are so impressive. They're taking the worst cases.
Yeah.
They're taking the treatment-resistant people, and showing that it can work. Yeah.
Well, like you said, one key element is that the people walking into the treatment want to change. They might not know how, but there has to be that desire to, it's like you can't force someone to be hypnotized, so to speak. It's like, they have to want to go in that direction. You're just giving them really, look, there's something going on beyond the mind with these medicines. That's what's be really interesting to find out more about. But there seem to be like changes in the unconscious and changes to your biochemistry. There's the anecdotal research about psilocybin working really well with depression too. And my God, wouldn't that be great to have more information about? But I hear you, it's not something the pharmaceuticals want. And the pharmaceutical companies have a lot of power in our government, more than ideological power. they can write the laws. And so let's just hope that, I don't want to make a deal with the devil, but I mean, it's just sort of like the cannabis movement. I think people like Philip Morris and stuff, they thought, well, no problem. We'll just start selling this stuff, like we'll join the party.
The other thing with psilocybin and depression is microdosing. We haven't talked about microdosing at all, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, and there's some studies starting about that. And, just, subliminal doses of mushrooms have been shown to help some people with mood and creativity. And, these are things you can grow. You can grow these mushrooms yourself,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's amazing how, it's a shame that this stuff has had to stay underground for so long. And
this Controlled Substances Act was powerful.
Major publishers like Penguin Random House are now coming out with books, and front page New York Times and Scientific American, and the TV, the morning shows are talking about this. I mean, Michael Pollan was on the Tonight Show talking about ego dissolution on the Tonight Show.
That's great. Yeah.
With who's the Tonight Show guy?
Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert, yeah. I'm thinking Johnny Carson. That's how old I am. Stephen Colbert, he's trying to talk about ego dissolution with Stephen Colbert on the Tonight Show. Talk about that's mainstream.
Fantastic. Yeah. I love it.
Mainstream.
I love it.
And then Colbert had a great line. He said, oh, you think so? Ego should be a controlled substance?
Yeah, maybe. Knock it down a few pegs. Yeah. Well, that's great. So before we wrap this up, any other things that came for you through this process that I'm just curious, when you started this book to when you ended it, did it change your own mind? And then beyond the private personal work you've done with the actual medicine, which I commend you for not just writing about it, but doing it. But how did your thinking change in general? I mean, personally, not just on the subject. Or did it?
For me, it was kind of a rediscovery in a way. I mean, I had some very powerful and some very, very difficult experiences with LSD back when I was 19 years old, freshman at Cal. And so I both honor psychedelics and I'm kind of terrified by them at the same time, because I had a real sort of almost like a psychotic break for a few months, which I was kicked off by a bad LSD trip. I had flashbacks. I thought you should think that was anti-drug propaganda. I had them, and so I don't want to sound cavalier. I think these substances can be dangerous if they're not used properly, and I think people really have to show a lot of caution. But anyway, so but I had a lot of positive experiences back in the day, and now that I'm older, I'm sort of semi-retired now. For me, it's great to be able to find a way to bring these tools back into my life, as part of my spiritual journey, and to do it, in a more mature, a safer and saner way. And so far not falling back into any kind of addictive kind of, problems with them. So and I think there are a lot of people like me, a lot of baby boomers who had powerful experiences, back in their 20s, back in the 60s and 70s, who are now, they've raised their family, they've had their career. Now they have some time, and I think there are a lot of people my age, and I'm hearing from people that, maybe it's time to dip our toe back in and re-experience this. But in a different way, in a more intentional way than we did when we were younger and just, kind of partying. And, so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, both with younger people discovering these, or rediscovering things, but also the baby boomers. We're this bulge in the population, that, and now that we're all hitting retirement, just to see if we can find a way to use these tools and ease our way out of the picture. And with a little compassion and awareness, and I'm talking about dying, I'm talking about death. There's a little, sometimes these medicines can be like a dress rehearsal for death.
Oh yeah. The biggest game in town.
When you get into your 60s, 70s, 80s, this is not a theoretical issue, right? So I'm real hopeful, and I'm grateful that I was able to do this book, and grateful for the people who opened their lives up and shared stories with me, and very personal stories about trauma and rape and addiction and depression, and willing to talk about it. And that's why I felt that I had to be equally open about my own life. I can't expect people to talk about this and to sort of hide in the closet myself. I had to kind of come out myself. So
good on you. I appreciate it. So where can people find the book and find your work?
You can order the book at your local independent bookstore if you wanted to go that route. You can, of course, order it on Amazon.com or Indie Books, so it's available, for order. You can order it from any bookstore. You can find out more about my work, other things I've done at donlattin.com, which is DONLATTIN.com. That has information about, this is my 6th book. So I've done some other work, and other newspaper magazine articles are posted there. So
awesome.
If people want to contact me, that's how they can do that too.
Well, of course, I'll link to it. If they want to scroll down, there'll be a link. But Changing Our Minds, Psychedelic Sacraments, and the New Psychotherapy, Don Lattin. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I'm sure we'll cross paths again.
Great. Thanks a lot, Trevor.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Don. That was awesome. I really, really enjoyed having that conversation. I learned a lot of things, and it makes me hopeful, and it's just exciting to hear what's going on. So check out Don's other books and check out Changing Our Minds. It's a good read. The music you are hearing in the background is called Angel's Rest, and it's from it's a live version from the Live at the Old Church album. So you can check that out wherever you listen to music. And that's pretty much it for now. I do have some exciting podcasts in the can coming out soon, and a couple we're about to record that I'm also quite excited about. Actually, lots of new opportunities coming down the pipe for the fall, some live things and some new retreats. So please do stay in touch and check out these things as they get announced, because I'm really excited about all of them. They're all super unique in all different parts of the country or the globe, and I want to see it. I want to connect. I want to grow with the community together. So keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, just do it with grace.
Hi.